She buried her father on Tuesday. Her husband handed her divorce papers on Wednesday, and by Friday he was dancing at his wedding with another woman. She was 6 months pregnant, standing in the rain at her father's funeral alone while her husband scrolled through his phone 3 feet away. He never offered his umbrella. He never held her hand. He just checked his watch twice. Then he sat across from her the next morning, calm, rehearsed, and said, "I've met someone. I want a divorce. I'll have the papers ready by Friday." He thought he was leaving a broken woman with nothing. He had no idea. Because what Marcus never bothered to ask, what never even crossed his mind, was who her father really was. The quiet janitor who packed her lunch in used paper bags had been hiding a $5.2 billion secret for 34 years, and every single dollar was already in her name. The people who underestimate you the most are often handing you the greatest opportunity to show them exactly who you are. If you've ever been underestimated for being quiet, drop your country in the comments. And if this story hits different, subscribe, because we tell the stories that actually matter.
The sky itself seemed angry that Tuesday, unleashing the kind of aggressive rain that soaks through your coat and turns the earth to mud. Maya stood at the graveside, 6 months pregnant, while Marcus kept his own umbrella. She noticed it instantly, not because she wanted a romantic gesture, but because when a gust of wind drove the rain into her face, he didn't even flinch to shield her. He just stayed dry, his eyes on his phone. People offered hugs and empty comforts. He was in a better place. His suffering was over. God needed an angel. She nodded, letting them believe their words helped. But she wanted to scream that his place was here with her, to meet his grandchild, to live. Marcus checked his watch twice during the service, and when it was time to share memories, he was silent. Maya spoke of her father's hands, how they were never still, always fixing, building, and staying steady when hers were trembling. Her voice broke, and she had to stop, but Marcus offered no comfort. As the casket was lowered, her heels sank into the wet ground, her knees buckling. A woman from church caught her arm, whispering, "I've got you, honey." Marcus never saw a thing. After, at the church, they ate sandwiches no one really wanted. But what he didn't know was that a quiet promise from a hospital bed was about to change everything. Her father's final, strained words echoed in her mind, "Go to bank." And in the days that followed, she did just that, unlocking a truth that would give her the strength to face this gala, not as a victim, but as the silent force he had always trained her to be. It began in a sterile room where machines did the breathing his body no longer could. Maya gripped the cold metal bed rail, her knuckles white, listening to that mechanical rhythm. There was the ventilator's hiss, the monitor's constant beep, and the indifferent buzz of the lights overhead. His chest rose and fell, but it wasn't his own power at work. "Daddy," she whispered, so close she could smell the antiseptic, "I just need you to fight one more time." His hand, warm and rough from a lifetime of labor, felt strong enough to hold on, but not to wake up. The doctors spoke in soft terms like declining and unresponsive, language too gentle for the cruel reality that he was dying. She had been there for 48 hours straight, without sleep or food, fueled by bitter coffee and the ache in her back. Her husband, Marcus, had only sent 2 texts. One asked if she needed anything. The second said he'd be late. She ignored both. Beyond the hospital, the world was alive with honking cars and laughter, completely oblivious that her own world was collapsing. Inside, time was heavy, pressing down to see how much she could endure. He had raised her alone, never complaining, offering a steady, quiet love every single day. At 7, he taught her to tie her shoes. At 12, how to change a tire. At 16, he taught her that the loudest people often have the least to say. And when she was 23 and announced her engagement, he didn't give his blessing right away. He just watched Marcus across the dinner table, his questions feeling a little too sharp. Afterwards, he hugged her and said, "I trust you to know what is in your own heart." He didn't say he trusted Marcus. He trusted her. She hadn't understood the distinction then, but it was becoming painfully clear. A nurse came in, quietly checking monitors, adjusting tubes, avoiding Maya's eyes. She had seen this scene end too many times. Maya's phone buzzed, but she let it be. Then his fingers twitched. She sat up straight, her heart racing. "Dad?" His lips formed words that wouldn't come out. She leaned closer, desperate. Finally, he managed 3 slow, strained words. "Go to bank." Then the monitors screamed. Nurses rushed in, leading a numb Maya into the hall to wait for the news she already knew. Her father was gone, leaving behind a mystery she couldn't yet comprehend. Growing up, Maya assumed every father worked 2 jobs. Hers came home tired, but always had a smile for her. She thought every dad could fix a leaky faucet and tell incredible bedtime stories. During the day, he was a janitor at an elementary school. At night, he did maintenance at a church. Weekends were for helping neighbors with repairs they couldn't afford, paid for in homemade meals and deep respect. He was never angry, just present. He worked, came home, cooked, and asked about her day like it was the most important news in the world. They lived in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment. She got the bedroom. For 16 years, he slept on the couch, and not once did he make her feel it was a sacrifice. They had few things, but everything was immaculate. He folded his work uniforms with the precision other men gave their expensive suits. He polished his work boots every Sunday. Her school events were circled in red on the kitchen calendar, and he never missed one. Other parents arrived in business clothes and new cars. Her father showed up in his janitor's uniform, smelling faintly of floor cleaner, and sat in the back so he wouldn't embarrass her. But she was never embarrassed. While other parents checked their phones, he watched her as if she were the only person in the room. He taught her things a janitor shouldn't know: how to read a contract for hidden clauses, how to spot a lie by watching someone's hands, how to walk into a room and know who held the real power. "Money talks, baby girl," he'd say, "but character whispers. The people worth your time know how to listen for it." She didn't understand then, but she never forgot. So that's how it was. People offered condolences, insisting he was in a better place, but all she could think was that his best place was here with her. He was supposed to be here to see her become a mom, to hold his grandchild, to stay. At the funeral, Marcus glanced at his watch twice. When the pastor asked for memories, he stayed quiet. Maya spoke of her father's hands, always working, always fixing, always strong when hers trembled. Her voice broke, and she had to pause, but Marcus never offered a comforting touch. As the casket was lowered, she stepped up with a rose, her heels sinking into the mud. She nearly fell, but an older woman from church caught her arm, whispering, "I've got you, honey." Marcus didn't even see it happen. Later, at the church, they served sandwiches no one wanted. The coffee in thin paper cups grew cold as conversations buzzed around her, feeling far too loud for such a sad day. Maya, completely drained, found a quiet corner to sit, rubbing her stomach. The baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing the profound wrongness of it all. It took Marcus a full 20 minutes to find her. He didn't ask, just stated, "I need to leave for a bit." Confused, she looked at him. "Now?" He nodded. "Yeah, that work thing I told you about last week." She couldn't recall him saying anything, but maybe grief had erased the memory. It didn't matter. "Okay," she whispered. He gave her a quick, empty kiss on her head. I'll see you tonight, he promised. But he never came home. By 10 that night, she was alone in their apartment, still in her funeral clothes, staring at her silent phone. No calls, no texts, no answers. Just a quiet room and the chilling realization that she had just said goodbye to the one man who was always there for her. She knew then that her own husband had left their marriage long before he left the church that day. She just hadn't been willing to see it. The final proof didn't come from a confession or even a rumor, but from a tagged photo on Instagram. It was close to midnight when she finally forced herself off the sofa, changed out of her dark dress, washed her face, and got into bed. Her body was heavy with grief, but her mind wouldn't quiet down. She opened her phone, scrolling for anything to distract her from two facts. Her father was gone, and her husband wasn't home. That's when it appeared, a picture of Marcus in a restaurant she recognized, an expensive place with soft lights and candles. He was across from a woman she'd never seen before, and this was clearly not a business meeting. The woman was young, stunningly put together, the kind of beautiful that requires effort and money. She leaned forward, laughing at something he'd said. He was leaning back, relaxed, with a smile Maya hadn't seen in months. The caption read, "New Beginnings," followed by emojis of champagne glasses and stars. It was posted an hour ago. Maya just stared at the screen, her vision blurring. The tears didn't fall right away. She just sat there, the frantic beat of her heart pounding in her throat. Her father had been buried less than 12 hours ago, and her husband was already celebrating a fresh start. She clicked on the woman's profile, Isabel Chun, a marketing executive with 73,000 followers, whose every photo looked like an ad for a perfect life. Maya started scrolling through Marcus's recent activity and found a string of likes on Isabel's posts going back 3 months. There were comments that were a little too familiar, a pattern so obvious she'd either been too naive or too worn out to notice. Her hands started to shake, not with grief, but with something sharper, the physical shock of a betrayal her mind had tried to ignore. She got up, went to the bathroom, and held onto the sink. Looking at her reflection, pregnant, exhausted, and married to a man who couldn't even wait a single day after her father's funeral to take another woman out. She didn't scream or break anything. She didn't even call him. She just stood there, breathing slowly, feeling the baby move inside her. After a moment, she went back to bed, put her phone down, and chose to wait. Marcus got home at 2:14 in the morning. She heard the key in the lock, the clink of his keys on the counter, and his steps down the hall. He didn't even check on her, just went straight to the guest room. In that moment, Maya knew it was over. She just had no idea how much worse it would get. He waited until morning to talk, not out of kindness, but because cowards like to do their worst deeds in the daylight. Maya was in the kitchen, staring into a cup of coffee she wasn't going to drink when he came in. He looked rested and showered, as if he'd rehearsed this. "We need to talk," he began. She said nothing, just watched him, knowing what was coming. He sat across from her, folding his hands like it was a business meeting. "I think we can both agree this isn't working," he said. Her stomach dropped, but her face remained blank. "I've been unhappy for a while now. And I think you have been, too. We just didn't want to say it." A bitter laugh almost came out. "We," as if this was a mutual decision, as if she was the one who had been pulling away. "I want a divorce," he said, the words flat and final, with no trace of regret. She felt a sharp kick from the baby, as if it sensed the world tilting on its axis. "You're serious," she said quietly. "I am. My father died 2 days ago. I know, and I'm sorry about that. But his death doesn't change things between us. As if their marriage was just a physical space they accidentally occupied. I'll support the baby, he continued, his tone like a lawyer negotiating terms. Financially. I won't abandon that responsibility. But you and me, we're done. I've met someone, it was out. She stared at him, really looking at him for the first time. This was the man she had trusted, the one she had picked, the one who promised forever in front of all their friends and family. And here he was, calmly tearing her world apart like it was a pile of old mail. I've already talked to a lawyer, he added. I'll have the papers drawn up by the end of the week. You won't have to do anything but sign. Just sign, she repeated, her voice empty. Yeah, I'm trying to make this as easy as I can for you. Easy. She wanted to scream, to throw something at him. She wanted to demand how he could do this to her now, like this, without a hint of shame. But she held it in because a piece of her father's advice echoed in her head. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time. Marcus was showing her exactly who he was, and she believed him. Okay, she said. He blinked, clearly surprised. He'd been expecting a fight. Okay? Yes, if this is what you want, then okay. He stood up, relief washing over his face. I really think this is for the best. For both of us. She didn't respond. He turned and walked out of the room, and then out of the apartment, leaving her there, 6 months pregnant and completely alone. It was then she recalled her father's last words to her, go to the bank. She grabbed her coat and walked out the door. If you think that leaving someone, when they are at their most vulnerable, is ever justified, you need to hear this. Because what happens next will make you question everything you believe about loyalty. The bank was less a bank and more a vault for secrets. Maya walked through the grand lobby under massive marble pillars and chandeliers that felt out of place for a building handling mere money. She lowered the letter, her father's familiar script a comforting blur through her tears. In the silent, windowless room, it all finally made sense. The box sat open on the table, a testament to a 34-year secret. He hadn't been running from his fortune. He was preserving it, building a fortress around her. A specific clause in the trust, a shield called spousal exclusion, made that clear. This was about freedom, about ensuring no one could ever use wealth to control her life as they had once tried to control his. It was the ultimate gift of protection, delivered from beyond the grave. This moment was set into motion 3 weeks ago, right after the doctors delivered their grim diagnosis. Knowing his time was short, he made one final crucial update to the irrevocable trust he'd established decades earlier. He met with Victor Kane, the loyal account manager who had guarded the secret for 32 years, and finalized everything. He ensured every legal loophole was sealed and every asset was shielded. He prepared the box, wrote the letter, and trusted that the daughter he raised would be strong enough to understand the truth when the time came. For 35 years, he had paid the price for this day. Maya pictured him coming home exhausted, the smell of industrial cleaner on his clothes from scrubbing floors. A man who secretly controlled an empire lived the life of a janitor. He wore worn-out boots, ate simple meals, and fixed their leaky faucet himself. He did it all to give her a normal life, to teach her that character was built, not bought. He willingly traded a mansion for a tiny apartment and a life of luxury for a life of meaning, all so she could grow up untouched by the world he had fled. He had prepared this fortress long ago, just after the family dispute that made him vanish from public life. He wasn't just disowned, he orchestrated his own disappearance. Before adopting the name James Richardson, he did more than just walk away from the Hartwell legacy. He secretly restructured the entire fortune, burying it in such complex legal entities that his family's army of lawyers could never touch it. He then handed complete control to Victor Kane, a man he trusted implicitly, and began his new life, waiting for the day his daughter would need what he had saved. The choice had been presented to him as a simple, brutal ultimatum when he was just 26 years old. His family, a dynasty that valued strategic mergers over matters of the heart, demanded he abandon the woman he loved. She was not part of their master plan, a variable they couldn't control. They placed the family fortune on one side of the scale and his future with her on the other. For them, it was a test of loyalty to the empire. For him, it wasn't a choice at all. He chose her, and in doing so, he chose an entirely different kind of life. It all started in a small bookstore near the university. He was James Hartwell III, suffocating under the weight of his name, and she was a girl who read poetry on her lunch breaks, her hair always in a single braid. She made him laugh, a sound he barely recognized in himself. She didn't care about his family or the money. She saw the person he was when the world wasn't looking. She was the first person who made him feel like his life could be his own. Marrying her was the one thing he knew he had to do. "You go to this address," he'd whispered, his voice faint in the sterile hospital room. It was one of his last coherent instructions. "Ask for Victor Kane. He's expecting you." After he was gone, the hospital gave her a large envelope holding his personal effects. Inside, with his old watch and wedding band, was a small, ornate brass key. It seemed like a random object from his quiet life, but now his words echoed in her mind. She clutched the key, the cold metal a link to a final puzzle he had left for her to solve. The weeks after his death were a haze of grief and mounting bills. Her father, the man who had worked so hard scrubbing floors, had left behind almost nothing. No savings, no life insurance, just a collection of old books and the lingering scent of his cheap aftershave in their small apartment. She felt completely adrift, lost in the sudden emptiness. Then she remembered his final, urgent request and the strange, heavy key in the envelope. It felt like a long shot, a dying man's confusing wish, but it was the only thread he had left for her to pull. The heels of her sneakers squeaked on the mirror-like polish of the floor. She felt utterly out of place, as if she were underdressed and unprepared for whatever was coming. Before she could even reach the information desk, a woman in an expensive-looking suit approached her. "Miss Richardson?" Maya froze. "Yes, we've been expecting you. Please, come with me." She hadn't called ahead or made any kind of appointment, but somehow, in this world of wealth and power she knew nothing about, they were waiting for her, and she had no idea why. But the inevitable arrival of a man just like Marcus, charming and full of empty promises, gone when things got hard. The trust was designed to give her money whenever she asked for it, and once she took it, it became her own separate property by state law. Marcus would never be able to touch it in a divorce, not ever. Her father had seen it coming, not the specifics, but the type of man, and he had spent 30 years making sure no one could hurt her the way his own family once tried to hurt him. The documents had other protections too, clauses for her future children, for what to do if she couldn't make her own decisions, and advice on how the fortune should be managed. A single phrase was woven throughout the legal text. The beneficiary maintains sole and absolute discretion. In other words, it was all hers. No one could ever tell her what to do with it. With the divorce papers he'd promised by week's end, Marcus believed he was doing her a kindness, completely oblivious to her new reality. He had no idea who her father really was or what she now possessed. He couldn't fathom that the woman he was casting aside now held more power than he could ever accumulate. The question wasn't whether she could strike back, but whether she should. Her father's words resonated, True strength lies in knowing you don't have to use it. But a part of her disagreed. Power doesn't need a flashy entrance. It's patient. So she would be, too. Picking up the letter, she saw 2 pages remained. Now that you understand what you have, you must know who you are. This inheritance is not your identity. It can't be. You are made of stronger stuff, of integrity, of sacrifice, of seeing what happens when love is chosen over wealth. Raising you in simplicity wasn't a punishment. It was an education. It taught you how to earn, to wait, to live without, and to decide based on worth, not convenience. The wealthy born often miss this. They confuse their bank accounts with their character, thinking money is strength when it only makes them loud. You aren't one of them. You know strength isn't what you own, but what you do when you own nothing. And now, with everything at your disposal, you must cling to that truth. Because people will eventually find out. Not right away, but they will. And you will see them for who they are. The ones who stood by you with nothing will remain when you have it all. Those who left you will crawl back. And those who underestimated you will beg for another look. Grant it to them, not for their sake, but for the priceless lesson of watching people reveal their true nature. Some will be angry you kept your secret. Let them be. You owe no one a look at your bank statements or an excuse for your privacy. Others will expect you to become arrogant and entitled. Prove them wrong by staying grounded. Then there are those who will misread you completely. They will see your quiet as weakness and your kindness as naivety. They will think, because you don't show off your wealth, you have none. These are the ones to watch. Not because they can hurt you, you're beyond that now, but because they will test your soul, and how you react will forge who you become. And that is my real gift to you, patience. The power to bear insults without lashing out. To let others think what they will while you build what they can't touch. To stay silent when they demand you yell. Getting even is for fools. Anyone with cash can ruin a life. But restraint? The decision not to use your power, that's legacy. I love you, my girl, always. You'll be more than okay. Dad. Maya carefully folded the letter, placing it back in its envelope. No tears fell. No anger flared. She didn't call Marcus to inform him of his life's greatest blunder. She just sat, a hand on her belly, feeling her daughter kick, and knew her father was right. Some battles don't deserve your energy. The people destined to lose will manage it all on their own. 20 minutes later, Victor returned, tapping softly before entering to give her a moment. Any question? He asked gently. Just one, Maya answered. How much is there? He sat opposite her, presenting a simple summary sheet. It detailed stocks, bonds, properties, private equity, and global funds. The portfolio was spread across 12 nations, cautiously built over 34 years. It was managed quietly, without risk or fanfare. The total valuation from the last quarter was $5.2 billion. The number was just a fact on the page that her brain couldn't process. She reread it, trying to connect that figure to the father who raised her in a one-bedroom apartment and packed her lunch in used paper bags. That's not possible, she whispered. It's a conservative figure. Victor explained. Your father steered clear of high-risk investments, always preferring stability. Had he been bolder, the amount could be significantly higher. A dizzy spell washed over her. What am I supposed to do with all this? Victor gave a sad, warm smile. Whatever you want. That's the point. Live off the interest, donate it all tomorrow, or pretend it doesn't exist. It's yours, no strings attached. Does anyone else know? Only me. Now you. Your father was exceptionally private. Her thoughts drifted to Marcus, to the divorce he was initiating, to his patronizing offer of child support. He knew nothing, and she wouldn't enlighten him. I want this kept quiet, she stated firmly. No one else finds out. Victor nodded. A very wise decision. Whenever you are ready, we can arrange for the distributions. Until that time, everything will remain exactly as it is. She rose from the chair, shook his hand firmly, and walked out of the bank the same way she had entered, alone and still grieving, but no longer unsure. A profound change had taken place. She was now armed with a powerful truth Marcus knew nothing about. The woman he had cast aside was not broken. She was emboldened, and patience, a lesson her father had instilled in her, was the most formidable weapon in her arsenal. This quiet resolve was a world away from the sharp pain she had felt just 3 weeks prior, when the courthouse photos appeared online. Marcus and Isabel, smiling triumphantly, were officially married in a blur. The comments exploded instantly. Wow, that was fast. Did his wife not just lose her father? Some people have absolutely no shame. Maya saw the pictures, felt the sting, but refused to engage. She carried on, going to doctor's appointments, preparing the nursery, and rereading her father's letter until she had committed every single word to memory. Whenever anyone inquired about how she was coping, Maya would offer a serene smile and give the same steady answer every single time. I am fine. And what was strange is that she truly was. It was not because the betrayal did not sting, but because she had learned a lesson that Marcus never would. True power does not need to perform for an audience. It simply bides its time. He had moved with astonishing speed. Their divorce was officially completed in just 43 days. With his new marriage taking place only 12 days after that, Maya signed every single document without putting up a fight. She requested no alimony and did not contest the assets they hardly had. She took only what was legally hers, which amounted to almost nothing, and allowed him to leave believing he had handled the whole situation with maturity. He made one public post about it, a very carefully written statement about moving on with grace and choosing his own happiness. The comments poured in, a mix of support and disgust. Good for you, man. Life is too short. You seriously could not wait 6 months? Her father literally just passed away. Isabel also posted something, a picture of her hand showing off a brand new ring, with the caption, "When you know, you just know." The internet certainly had its opinions, and they were very strong. Maya became the subject of stories people told at dinner parties. The pregnant wife, whose husband abandoned her, the woman who never uttered a single word in her own defense, the one everyone was watching, just waiting to see when she would finally crack. Her husband had left her immediately following her father's funeral. She never corrected anyone, never defended herself, and never explained that she was fine. She just kept her head down and remained patient, because her father had taught her something most people never learn. Public opinion is temporary, but a person's character is permanent. And at that moment, Marcus was showing the entire world exactly who he was. Then, on a Tuesday, in late September, a cream-colored envelope made of heavy paper showed up in her mailbox. Her name was written in beautiful script, with no return address. Inside, there was an invitation to the inaugural event of the Richardson Hartwell Foundation. Her breath hitched in her throat as she read the words over again. Richardson Hartwell was her father's real name, and by extension, hers as well. The event was set for October 14th, a black tie affair at a private location with a limited number of guests. At the very bottom, in smaller print, it said her presence was requested as the foundation's primary honoree. She took out her phone and dialed Victor's number. He picked up on the second ring. "You received the invitation," he said, more as a statement than a question. "What is all this?" "It is your father's final project. It is time for people to finally understand who you truly are. A professional and polished press release was sent out 3 days later. The Richardson Hartwell Foundation was launching with a $50 million endowment to support education, workforce development, and single-parent households. The foundation was created to honor the legacy of James Richardson, who had served his community quietly for decades. The article featured a picture of her father in a suit from years ago, looking like he belonged in a boardroom, not a janitor's uniform. People were confused. Wait, is that the guy from the elementary school? Who is paying for all of this? The press release identified an anonymous founding donor. The community's reaction was a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Rumors spread that it was a scam, or that Maya was using a large settlement from Marcus to fix her public image. Nobody guessed the real story. Victor had sent her the guest list in an encrypted email. There were 200 names, and near the bottom was Marcus Chun, plus a guest. "Why is he invited?" she had asked Victor. "Your father specifically requested it. He left detailed instructions, including the exact names." "That makes no sense. Dad passed away before Marcus even filed for divorce." "Your father was very perceptive," Victor said carefully. "He had a way of seeing things before they happened." And she understood. He had known. It was not for revenge, but for education. A lifetime of wondering what could have been. Her father's letter came to mind, his advice on patience and letting people show their true selves. "He'll bring Isabel," she said softly. "Probably, and tongues will wag." "They're already wagging." She took a deep breath, a hand on her stomach as the baby stirred. "Okay," she finally said. "I'll be there." "Good," Victor replied, "because this night isn't about him. It's about you. It's time everyone understood that." The venue was magnificent, an old estate converted into a modern event hall. Chandeliers like frozen waterfalls hung from high ceilings, their light reflecting on the mirror-like floors. The table linens alone likely cost more than a month's rent. Maya arrived 30 minutes early, using a private entrance where Victor met her. He looked her over and smiled. "You look perfect," he said. She'd chosen an emerald green empire waist dress that complemented her advanced pregnancy. Her hair was styled simply, her jewelry minimal, save for one striking piece, a diamond necklace from the safe deposit box. It was classic, elegant, and subtle, unless you knew its history. She didn't know its price, only that it belonged to the grandmother her father's family had disowned along with him. Wearing it felt like justice. "How are you?" Victor asked. "I'm petrified," she confessed. "Good. It means you're taking this seriously." The guests started to file in. From a private room with a one-way mirror, Maya watched the main hall fill. She saw faces she knew, from her father's church, his old job, neighbors, and then she saw Marcus. He walked in with Isabel, who wore a fiery red dress designed to command attention. Marcus, however, looked out of place, not because of the lavish setting. With his jaw set, Marcus escorted Isabel toward the bar, playing the part of the devoted partner. He had no clue why they were even at this charity launch. He scanned the ballroom, but if he was looking for Maya, he didn't spot her. The two of them grabbed drinks, mingling with strangers and projecting an image of effortless success. From a private room, Maya could feel her own heart pounding in her ears. Victor materialized beside her. "You don't have to go in yet," he said gently. "We can wait for the program to begin." "No," Maya replied, her voice low but firm. "I want to walk in like everyone else." Victor looked concerned. "Are you sure?" She simply nodded. Her father's most important lesson echoed in her mind. Confidence isn't about being ready. It's about taking the next step, even when you're not. She left the quiet of the side room, moved down the long corridor, and hesitated just outside the grand entrance. After a single, deep breath, she stepped into the light. The room didn't go silent immediately, but a palpable change swept through the air. First one conversation faded, then another, until the lively chatter just ceased. Every single person turned to look, not because of some dramatic entrance, but because a very pregnant woman had just walked in, completely on her own. She saw the wave of recognition move through the guests. Then she saw Marcus. His face went entirely blank, then morphed into confusion, and finally settled on an expression of pure, unadulterated panic. Isabel leaned in to whisper something to him, but he didn't respond, his eyes locked on Maya. Maya, however, refused to meet his gaze. She moved with quiet determination toward a reserved table near the front, sat down carefully, and rested her hands on her lap. Just breathe. An older woman with a kind face approached her. "You must be Maya," she said. "Your father spoke of you constantly. I'm so very sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Maya managed. The woman smiled warmly. "He would be so incredibly proud of you tonight." A lump formed in Maya's throat, and all she could do was give a small nod in return. More people approached her table, offering sympathy and sharing fond memories of her dad. All the while, Marcus remained frozen across the room, a terrifying thought beginning to take shape in his mind. This wasn't just some random gala. This was her night, and he had no idea what was about to unfold. The ballroom lights began to dim, and a single microphone was placed on the small stage. Victor was the first to approach it. "Good evening," he began. "Thank you all for being here. Tonight isn't just about launching a new foundation. It's about honoring a man who lived his principles every day, especially when no one was watching." He told stories of her father, his quiet dedication, his understated kindness, his unwavering reliability. All around the room, people nodded, and a few discreetly dabbed at their eyes. Then Victor's tone shifted. "What most of you don't know is that James Richardson made an incredibly difficult decision. 34 years ago, he walked away from a life of immense wealth and privilege because he refused to abandon the woman he loved. He changed his name, started over from nothing, and built a life defined by his character, not his family money." Confused murmurs rippled through the audience. Marcus leaned forward, his attention now completely captured. "That choice cost him everything his family valued," Victor continued, "but it gave him something far more precious, his integrity, and a daughter who inherited his values instead of his portfolio." Victor paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The Richardson Hartwell Foundation was created because James never forgot his origins, and because he spent 30 years ensuring his daughter would have the resources to build something meaningful, free from the burden of expectation or entitlement. He then gestured directly to Maya. "It is my honor to introduce the Foundation's founder and its sole benefactor, Maya Richardson." Polite applause broke out, quickly growing into a wave of thunderous support. Maya rose and walked toward the stage, each step feeling deliberate and heavy. She watched as the truth finally dawned on Marcus's face. His confusion melted away, replaced by dawning comprehension, which then curdled into absolute horror. He was finally connecting the dots. Richardson Hartwell, her father's real name, the $50 million endowment. It was all hers. Isabel looked at him, completely bewildered by his reaction, but he offered no words. He just stared as the woman he abandoned, the grieving, 6 months pregnant woman he'd written off as broken, stood before 200 people who were finally seeing what he never did. She was not a casualty. She was his consequence. Maya reached the microphone and adjusted it slightly. The room fell into a profound silence. She didn't look at Marcus. She looked at the faces of the people who had genuinely cared for her father, the ones who were here to celebrate his quiet goodness. Then she began to speak, her voice steady and clear. My father taught me that our most important choices are the ones nobody ever sees. She let that hang in the air for a moment. He taught me that love isn't about convenience. It's about showing up for people when it's hard, especially when no one is watching, and especially when you have every reason to walk away. A few people in the crowd nodded slowly. He also taught me that wealth without character is just noise, that true power isn't what you own, it's what you choose to build with it when you don't have to build anything at all. She glanced at her notes before looking back at the crowd. Most of you knew my father as a janitor, a handyman, someone who was always the first to arrive and the last to leave, never asking for credit. He was supposed to take over an entire corporate empire, but he walked away from it all because the people in charge told him that love wasn't a good investment. Audible gasps filled the room. He proved them wrong, she said, her voice unwavering. He spent 34 years of his life proving that a good life isn't measured in assets, but in integrity. And when he passed away, he left me something much more valuable than money. She paused. He left me a choice. The room was completely still. I could have kept this a secret. I could have taken everything he built for me and just vanished. No one would have ever known. She looked directly out at the guests. But my father didn't hide his wealth out of shame. He hid it because he wanted me to understand who I was long before I understood what I had. She let the idea resonate. And now that I know both, I'm choosing to do what he would have done. I'm going to build something that lasts. I will help the people who get overlooked. I will be the safety net for families who don't have one. Victor stepped forward and placed a document on the podium. The Richardson Hartwell Foundation is established with an initial endowment of $50 million, and it is structured for sustained generational impact. Applause started to swell, but Maya held up a hand. She wasn't finished. That $50 million represents less than 1% of the total trust my father established in my name. The clapping died instantly. People exchanged stunned glances, trying to do the math. The full valuation, as of last quarter, is $5.2 billion. A new kind of silence fell over the room, not shock, but profound realization. She didn't smile. She stated it as a fact. I'm telling you this not to impress you, but to make one thing clear. My father didn't raise me to be rich. He raised me to be responsible. And that is precisely who I intend to be. She stepped back from the microphone, and the applause that followed was a thunderous roar, not just polite clapping. People surged to their feet, some with tears in their eyes. Maya walked off the stage with quiet dignity, returning to her seat. Across the room, Marcus was a statue, his face drained of all color, his hands clenching the table's edge. Isabel tried to speak to him, but he wasn't listening, his mind frantically doing the math. The woman he'd left, believing she was destitute, had just shown she commanded more wealth than he could ever comprehend, and he had thrown it all away. Not because she wasn't enough, but because he never bothered to ask who she truly was. If you have ever underestimated someone for being quiet, this is your moment to reflect. Subscribe if you believe character and loyalty still matter, because this story isn't over. As soon as Maya was off stage, Marcus tried to bolt. He jumped up, grabbed Isabel's hand, and muttered something about fresh air, but Victor was quicker. He didn't physically block the exit, just stood near it, with a calm, knowing look that said more than words ever could. Marcus froze. Isabel looked baffled. What is the matter? He couldn't answer. What could he say? That the woman he divorced just 8 weeks prior, whom he abandoned while pregnant and grieving, was just revealed as one of the richest people in the state. That he'd walked away from billions because he couldn't stick it out through a rough patch. That every single choice he'd made in the last 6 months was based on a fundamental miscalculation of who held the power. Isabel tugged on his arm. Marcus, talk to me. He sat back down, mechanically, feeling utterly numb. All around them, people were buzzing with excitement about the foundation, Maya's incredible composure, and her father's legacy. Someone nearby commented, "Can you imagine walking away from that fortune for the person you loved? That is so rare," another added, "and to raise a daughter who is so grounded, that is even rarer." Marcus heard every word, each one a painful jab at the man he had failed to be. He glanced toward Maya, who was now surrounded by people, thanking her, hugging her, and offering support. She looked exhausted, but her resolve was unshakable. She didn't look his way once, not out of spite, but because he was simply no longer significant. Finally, Isabel connected the dots. "Wait," she said slowly. "That is your ex-wife?" He gave a weak nod. "The one you said had nothing?" He stayed silent. She pulled her hand from his, staring. "Marcus, how much of this did you know?" "Nothing," he said in a whisper. "I knew nothing. You did not ask." He looked at her and saw her face change in an instant as she recalculated everything. She wasn't angry. She was reevaluating him, wondering if she'd made a catastrophic error by tying her future to someone who could misjudge a person so completely. He saw it, he felt it, and he realized this must have been how Maya felt. Watching someone you trust reassess your value based on new information. It was a deep, cutting humiliation. "I need to talk to her," he said suddenly. "Do not," Isabel warned him. "I have to. Marcus, just leave it alone." But he was already up, moving toward Maya. Victor intercepted him smoothly, his manner polite, but absolute. "She is not available right now. I just need 5 minutes. She is not interested." Marcus's jaw tensed. "You cannot speak for her. I do not have to. She asked me to ensure you understood there is nothing left to discuss." The words were a heavy door slamming shut. It was final, permanent. Marcus just stood there, powerless, while the woman he had so badly misjudged continued her conversations with people who were actually important. He was left wanting some kind of closure, an explanation, maybe even forgiveness. But Maya owed him none of those things, and she wasn't going to offer them. 10 minutes later, she left through a side exit with no fanfare. She was just gone. Marcus watched her leave and understood for the first time what it felt like to be completely irrelevant. Naomi Grace Richardson was born on a Thursday. She weighed 7 pounds and 4 ounces, had a full head of dark hair, and looked at the world with her grandfather's eyes. Maya held her, for the first time, in a perfectly still hospital room. There was no husband pacing the halls, no family in the waiting room. There was only Victor, who had insisted on being there, and a kind nurse named Petra. Petra stayed long after her shift was over, believing no one should have to welcome a child into the world all by themselves. "She is absolutely perfect," Petra whispered. Maya could only nod as tears streamed down her face. Her father should have been there to hold his granddaughter and see the beautiful life he had fought so hard to protect. The baby's weight felt like a fulfilled promise, a future secured by a man who would never see it. Maya gazed at Naomi's face, a flawless canvas of potential. "My sweet girl, I will always protect you," she murmured. But her father was gone, and Maya knew she had to be enough for them both. She studied Naomi's features, tracing her tiny fingers and memorizing every detail. "Your grandfather loved you long before you were here," she whispered to the baby. "He made sure you would have a life that was safe and full of freedom." Naomi let out a tiny yawn, a being impossibly small, yet complete. Victor moved closer, his expression warm as he looked at the newborn. James would have been bursting with pride, he said gently. You did a good thing, Maya. She let out a long, slow breath. I feel like all I did was survive. He smiled. That is more than most people can say. She spent 2 more days in the hospital, learning the rhythms of nursing, the mechanics of diapers, and how to function on 2 hours of sleep. A bouquet of flowers arrived from Marcus. They were generic, with a simple card. Congratulations, wishing you both well. She tossed them in the trash without a second thought. It was not an act of anger, but a recognition that they were a meaningless gesture from a man who had made his choice. Around that same time, Isabel posted a new photo on social media of her and Marcus at brunch, smiling. The caption read, "Choosing joy every day." Maya did not even read the comments. She had more important things to focus on. When she finally brought Naomi home, the apartment felt transformed. The space seemed smaller and quieter, yet it was filled with a new kind of presence. She placed the bassinet next to her bed. Above it, she hung a mobile her father had bought months before his illness worsened. He had carved the wooden animals himself during sleepless nights. She found them in his apartment after he passed, wrapped with a note that read, "For when she arrives." Now those same little animals spun gently above his granddaughter, casting soft shadows on the wall. Maya sat in the rocking chair and held Naomi tight. She started to sing a lullaby her father used to sing to her, and for the first time since his death, a feeling like peace settled over her. The grief had not disappeared, but she was finally starting to understand the lesson he had been trying to teach her all along. Legacy is not about the things you leave for people. It is about the people you raise to carry on. The foundation grew at a surprising pace. In just 6 months, it funded scholarships for 40 students, opened a new center for workforce training, and partnered with 3 local nonprofits. These groups provided aid to single parents facing eviction or medical debt. Maya managed it all quietly. There were no press tours or grand openings, and she gave speeches only when necessary. She simply showed up, made the decisions, signed the checks that changed lives, and went home to her daughter. People began to recognize her, not as a celebrity, but as someone making a difference. A woman in her late 30s approached her in a grocery store one day, her eyes full of tears. "You paid for my son's tuition," she said, her voice trembling. "I am not sure if you remember him, but he is the first person in our family to ever attend college. It is all because of you." Maya smiled gently at the woman. "It's because of your son. He's the one who earned this." "No," the woman insisted, shaking her head. "It's because someone finally believed he was worth investing in. Thank you." Encounters like these happened more and more. She kept every letter and email from people whose lives had been turned around by the Foundation's support. On the hard days, she would read them and remember that her work mattered. It wasn't about the money. It was about what the money made possible. Her father was right. Wealth without purpose is just empty noise, but wealth used with intention builds a legacy. By the time her daughter, Naomi, celebrated her first birthday, the foundation was active in 3 counties. Victor handled the operations, and Maya guided the vision. Eventually, people stopped wondering where the money came from and were just thankful it was there when it was needed most. Marcus heard about Maya's work occasionally, through shared acquaintances or when her name surfaced in circles that made him deeply uncomfortable. He tried to donate once, a check for $5,000, mailed directly to the Foundation's office. Victor sent it back without a letter, just the uncashed check accompanied by a note with a single word, "Declined." He never tried again. Isabel left him just 14 months after that gala. Her exit wasn't emotional. It was strategic. She finally understood what Maya always had. Marcus would always trade up for what he thought was a better deal, and then scramble to trade back down when he realized his mistake. She had no intention of being the next person he so completely underestimated. But because by then, Marcus had become a non-factor, just as she'd foreseen. The divorce was finalized without drama, barely causing a ripple. She hadn't set out to ruin him. She had simply built a world that didn't include him, rendering him a footnote in a story that was never his to begin with. He saw their daughter, Naomi, only once, by chance. He was walking in a park near his office when he spotted them. Maya was pushing a stroller, while Naomi, about 18 months old, pointed and babbled at the birds. Maya looked different, stronger, more confident than he'd ever seen her. He thought about approaching, but then he saw the victor walking beside them, laughing at something Naomi said. He was there in a way Marcus never was, so he hung back, a spectator to a life he'd thrown away. He saw the little girl first, with her mother's smile and her grandfather's eyes. She looked healthy, joyful, and so deeply loved. A strange knot twisted in Marcus's chest. Not quite jealousy, but the sharp pang of recognition. He saw the life he'd been offered a chance to join. He could have been the one pushing that stroller, the one his daughter's laughter was meant for. He could have built something real. Instead, he had chosen another way. It wasn't that Maya hadn't been enough for him. It was that he had decided she was too much work. He craved a life that was simple, convenient, and free of complications. The life he received in return was just empty. Isabel was long gone, and his professional reputation had suffered a death by 1,000 cuts. So quiet he didn't notice until his calls simply went unanswered. The upgrade he thought he was getting felt more hollow with every year that passed. During that exact same time, Maya had constructed something undeniable. She didn't do it with fanfare or a hint of revenge, but with a quiet, relentless resolve. Her name began to surface in places that truly mattered, on education panels, nonprofit boards, and community planning committees. She never sought out the spotlight, but it found her anyway. People always gravitate toward true competence, and she had demonstrated hers again and again. Marcus, in sharp contrast, had completely stalled. His career hit a dead end. All his relationships were superficial, and his life felt less like something he was living and more like a role he was playing. Sometimes, the urge to contact her would surface, to maybe offer an apology or an explanation. But what was there to say? I'm sorry I left when life got hard. I'm sorry I couldn't see what you were worth. I'm sorry my ego was too big to ask questions. Nothing he could say would alter a single thing. Maya had moved on, completely and forever. He was left with a lesson that had arrived far too late to be of any use. Years went by. Naomi entered kindergarten. The foundation marked its 5th anniversary, and Maya's name finally landed in a business journal. The headline read, "The Philanthropist You've Never Heard of." The article praised her father, the foundation, and the incredible work it was accomplishing. Marcus was mentioned only once as an afterthought. It stated that Richardson had been married before, but had been a single mother since her daughter was born, preferring to focus on her family and charitable work instead of public relationships. One sentence. It reduced him to a footnote. He read it over and felt a sharp sting, not because it was cruel, but because it was precise. He had become a minor detail, a brief chapter before the real story began. The most painful part was knowing he deserved it. Maya stood in her father's apartment one final time before the lease was up. 6 years had gone by since he passed. 6 years of building, growing, and discovering herself when no one was there to define her. Naomi was with Victor, giving Maya the solitude she needed to close this last chapter. The room seemed smaller than she recalled. She traced the kitchen counter where her father had made 1,000 meals. She sat on the sofa where he had slept for 16 years just so she could have the bedroom. The apartment was bare now, the furniture donated, his things sorted. All that was left was memory and one last envelope she'd saved. It was the one Victor had held for her, waiting until she was ready. She opened it gently. Baby girl, if you are reading this, it means enough time has passed for you to understand. Loss is not a punishment. Loss is permission. It's permission to find out who you are when no one's expectations are on you. It's permission to build something from your own values instead of chasing someone else's praise. It's permission to walk away from anyone who can't see your worth. Not out of anger, but because you are too busy building something better. Over these years, the letter went on, you have shown what I always knew. Character isn't what you own, it's what you do when you have everything to lose. Some will say you were lucky, that you inherited money and opportunity. Let them talk. They will never understand that wealth without wisdom is just a pile of money. And you, my dear, had wisdom long before you had any resources. I am so proud of you, not for being successful, but for always being kind. You have remained grounded, and you have always been you. That is your real inheritance. All my love, Dad. She folded the letter, slipped it into the envelope, and wiped her tears. Then she locked the door one last time and walked into the bright afternoon. Ah, so that's how it was. Her father had been right. Losing him wasn't the end. It was the beginning. It was permission to choose her own life, with no apologies and no need for approval. It was a choice she was forced to make when her husband walked away from her grief, deciding it was too inconvenient a burden to share, leaving her to face the loss of her father, utterly and completely alone. If this story made you reflect on loyalty and responsibility, subscribing means you're choosing stories that make you better. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.